Welcome to Google Ads Unleashed, the podcast that helps you harness the power of Google Ads. And now your host, Jeremy Young.
Hello and welcome back to Google Ads Unleashed, guys. Hope everyone is doing fabulously today. Before I get into today's episode, I just want to give you a little disclaimer that this episode is very visual, so I highly recommend you actually go and check out the video that we do online of this as well whilst you're listening to this episode, because it's going to give you a ton of cool information, and it will also really help you to visually follow along what we're doing. I'm of course going to explain as best as possible what I'm all about today, but I think even listening to it will give you a good indication of what kind of train of thoughts should go into your considerations when you want to set the optimal targets for your business or your clients, depending on your situation. But before I start, I just want to also mention that Q4 is over, so thank God, because it was a really stressful period, but the new year is starting and we are growing as an agency, so we're looking for more one-to-one coaching clients. So we've got 2 more spots open now in Q1. So if you're interested to take your Google Ads skills to the next level, simply reach out. And also we are opening our doors to new client spots as well. So if you want to have a big team behind you that know what they're doing and are living and breathing Google Ads, we are your people. But let's dive right in. And this is one of the things that we would typically do for one of our clients. To start off, we use something very often for our business intelligence that is called Get Clar. So Clar is an amazing software. I've got no affiliation or anything with them, but I use them extremely regularly. I also use, for instance, Triple Whale, Northbeam, Hyros, several others that give us a good idea of the overall business's health, and they give us a good idea of a lot of different metrics that we should be tracking and what kind of targets we should be looking towards in order to improve performance as best as possible. And one of the things that we always do with our subscription-based clients, I say subscription, those are products that should be rebought as well at certain points, is to understand what ideal TCPA targets should we set in an ad account. Of course, there's incrementality involved, etc. as well. But generally speaking, what kind of targets should we be setting in our accounts in order to grow the business profitably and healthily? Of course, we always want to achieve a certain return on ad spend in order to be profitable, but more importantly, sometimes we actually want to buy in new customers at a profitable rate so that the business can grow naturally and can grow there. And something that we use here is from Get Clar, a tool that is called the CLV CAC ratio simulator. So there's lots and lots of free content online where you can download such sheets like you see in here, which I'm looking at right now as well, which is basically where you can hammer in certain pieces of information in order to simulate your ideal customer lifetime value to customer acquisition cost ratio, through which you can then set your ideal and calculate your ideal CAC in order to make the business grow and to achieve the growth that you want. So the first step is that you just put in something like CLV CAC ratio calculator into Google, and you can actually find those spreadsheets. I, for instance, found one from a page called loyaltylion.com, which does this pretty good, but I also would recommend just to download the free resource from clar.com, and you can actually get this here. And why is this so interesting? First of all, because in the end, it's all a numbers game, right? When people purchase with you or purchase with a client of yours, the first order will always have a certain average order value. You will always have certain costs of goods involved, cost of actually fulfilling the product, etc. And that leaves you with money for marketing. Now, you have to invest this money into marketing as profitably as possible. And of course, those customers, when they have actually been brought in to the business will at a certain point actually buy again or reorder or maybe or order again for a friend or whatever they do. And this is the so-called customer lifetime value. Okay, why is that really important? Because a business really, in marketing, it's important that you can spend the maximum possible to acquire a new customer at break even or better. And your customer lifetime value is actually where you would then get the cash and actually grow the business profitably from as well. And there's a few metrics that we need to maybe first go through, and then I can explain to you how this all works. So first of all, AOV, average order value. The average order value, pretty straightforward for the product that you sell, is the average value of each order. So let's say you have 100 orders, they all have a different, from 100 customers, and they all have different values. You take that entire sum, divided by 100, and that is what you end up with. This is a really healthy metric to understand what people usually spend on average in your store, and through that you can then actually calculate all of the following metrics following on from that. Then you need to understand something that is the so-called CM1 margin in your business. So GetCloud does this automatically when you actually apply all of the features within the platform, but your CM1 essentially determines your total, so CM1 stands for contribution margin 1, and it's a key financial metric that basically takes your revenue minus your COGS, your cost of goods sold, and that is how much profit remains to cover operating expenses and to cover things such as marketing, logistics, and all other things. Usually this is expressed in a percentage, okay? So typically what people do is write this out in a percentage. So your CM1 margin is, for instance, in this case, in this example that I'm running, 90%, and the average order value is 48 euros. So 90% of 48 euros is about 43 or something, basic 43.20, I believe. Is that correct? Oh yeah, it is actually 43.20. So yeah, very, very good, Jeremy. Yeah, so basically that is what is then left in order to sort of pay for the shipping and the logistics of it all, and for the marketing costs. Then you need to be aware of a figure called your CM2 margin. Your CM2 is basically the revenue minus cost of goods sold minus all of the direct costs that come with, for instance, delivering the product, shipping, packaging, transaction fees, and all of the stuff that happens before you get then an amount that's left over for marketing and for overheads before your fixed costs. Okay, so this is your CM2 margin. Usually, this will always be less than your CM1 margin. With this client, it's at 83%. So that means out of the 48 euros that a customer spends, 83% actually is left over for marketing costs. Okay, so this leaves us with a figure then of 40 euros on our first order. Okay, so that means our AOV by our CM2 AOV is now 40 euros on the first order. So you have to know those figures to understand what is left over for the marketing that I can now spend in order to actually calculate what the ideal CAC is for our client here. You also need to understand what CAC means, customer acquisition cost, CAC. So that is the cost that you can spend in your marketing to acquire a new customer. Okay. Then you also need to understand what CLV means. That's your customer lifetime value. So that's your entire revenue generated by all of the customers that you've generated, divided by the number of customers. So let's say you've got, within the last year, 100 customers that have spent 1,000 euros, then your customer lifetime value is 10 euros. Okay, so typically this is calculated quite easily by having, first of all, your average order value, and then times your CM2 margin, because that's what's left over for marketing. In this case, that's 40 euros. And then you usually add on what within the time frame you looked at, typically that is over all time, over, for instance, a year, what your customer lifetime value extension is. So for instance, you can calculate this quite easily. If your AOV is, let's say, 48 euros in platform, but your average or your lifetime value over the last 180 days actually is 25% more of that, which is roughly another 12-15 euros on top. So then your customer lifetime value actually is around 60, but of course with the CM2 margin, that's only about 50%, 50 then in the end. So again, mental gymnastics here. You take your average order value, you understand what is left over for marketing after you take in cost of goods away, after taking shipping, transaction costs, all the things that happen and the costs that incur with a sale. And then you understand how much more on average do people spend who we bring in terms of customer lifetime value, and you add that on top of your CM2 first order, okay? Again, in this example, 48 was the average order value, 83% is the CM2 margin. That leaves us with a CM2 first order of 40 euros. And on average, people spend about a quarter more over their lifetime value with this customer, with this business. And that turns out to be a customer lifetime value over this business's existence of 50 euros. So what information does that give us? It gives us the following information, that despite maybe even potentially making a loss on the first order, people will be spending more over their entire lifetime value, and this is actual additional revenue that we can then actually have in our business, and through which we can make forecasts, and through which we can actually calculate a profitable growth of the business. This is then very interesting for us, because we can now actually calculate what actual relationship between the customer lifetime value and the cost that we can actually spend to acquire a new customer, the CAC, we should actually go for in order to drive profitable business growth. You can then put in certain things, such as, for instance, marketing budget that we have per month into this, on how much more you want to spend per month, how long the life cycle of your average order of your customer lifetime value is. Typically, we go with a year or half a year or 18 months. There's no real, rule here that you can do. And then we will be able to also calculate what roughly our overhead costs are and what the starting balance is in the business. What then happens is you can then actually calculate over time what customer lifetime value to CAC ratio I should have in order to drive profitable business growth. So with this business, like I said, we spend about 29k every month at the moment in marketing costs, and we're doing so profitably. But in order to grow profitably and in order to get the cash balance to grow long term, we need a certain customer acquisition cost ratio to customer lifetime ratio in order to have the bell curve continuously go up and to actually be at a constant profitability and at a constant cash balance. Because there's certain costs, of course, every month in terms of overheads in relation to our obviously turnover. There's certain things to consider, so, for instance, how much budget we have, and we have to calculate that in. And usually this spreadsheet then does the magic for us. And here you then just have to play around a little bit. For instance, if I set a customer lifetime value to CAC ratio of 2 in this sheet, we will see that growth will just be accelerated massively, but EBITDA actually this stays the same. And then in order to have a customer lifetime value of 50, our CAC of course needs to be 25, and through that we can have really, really profitable growth. But it might take a longer time because we may not be able to drive as many customers aggressively with such a low CAC target. Now, if we go with a customer lifetime value or CAC ratio of 1, that means we spend 50 euros in order to actually make money. in order to get a new customer, and over their lifetime value, they're only making 50 euros. That means on the first order, we automatically lose 10 euros already, and the cash balance of this business would continuously go down, and we would continuously have a negative EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. We would be making a massive loss. And through that, you can then actually start sort of clawing your way up and seeing how would the business look like, and how does the business plan look like if we continue running the business in this particular fashion. And here, for instance, you can see, which is quite interesting, that we would sort of start with a life cycle of 12 months. If I set it to now 1.2, the customer lifetime value to CAC ratio, we could have a CAC of 42 euros in relationship to the customer lifetime value of 50. And then the business would only start being profitable after about a year and a half of launch, because we would have to spend a lot of cash to acquire new customers at under our break even, to then have such a big pool of customers and returning customers that we would actually start becoming profitable after about 7 months, and then making up the cash balance over time. That way, you can sort of start getting up and calculating your ideal CAC. So for instance, now at 1.3 a ratio, so that's a CAC of 38 euros in relationship to 50 euros customer lifetime value, we would see that we would probably make a loss for the first roughly 6 to 7 months, and then start being profitable and also being cash positive, or cash flow positive with this business. And if we'd then claw this up now to, let's say, 1.5, it would take 1 or 2 or 3 months of unprofitable EBITDA until we actually start building a cash balance. But we have now at this client arrived at 1.6, where off the bat we're super profitable, and where the cash balance continues to grow, and we're constantly at a positive EBITDA, and that leaves us with a CAC of 31 euros that we can spend per new customer in order to grow profitably in a CLV to CAC ratio of 1.6. So summa summarum, what this episode is all about is pretty straightforward. Get yourself, if this applies to you, onto GetClar, or onto, for instance, one of the other sheets that I found from Loyalty Lion online, and do the following. Simply head to there, download it, fill out the information. What's the average order value on the first order? You can even do this for each product, right? If they have different sort of margins and different lifetime values. Put in your CM1, where if you know, you must know it. Put in your CM2 margin. That determines what is your first order average order value after cost of goods sold are deducted, and all of the other costs involved with the order. Understand how much more do people grow over their defined lifetime window, let's say 12 months for instance. How much more do people actually purchase further down the line? The ideal way to find this out is to either use an app such as Triple Whale or such as GetClar to understand what your customer lifetime value extension is. With this client, it was 25%. So that means out of the first order, that is 40 euros, typically we will have a customer lifetime value of about 50 euros coming out. That determines our customer lifetime value of 50 euros, and that is what is left to spend on marketing. And with a CLV to CAC ratio of about 1.6, which is a CAC of 31, we can actually start growing this business profitably with the starting marketing budget that we have. You can just look at what you're currently spending or what you could be spending, so you can do a couple of variations of this, and you can also put in the overhead costs, and through that you actually understand how your business is going to be growing and what the ideal CAC is to set. And hopefully that was helpful. It's a little bit more abstract today because I was actually sharing my screen and showing this tool, but if you need help with this, obviously always reach out, jeremy@younganddigital.marketing, or send me a message on LinkedIn. It's Jeremy and Google Ads. And with that, I wish you a happy new year, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to Google Ads Unleashed. To connect with Jeremy, check him out online at www.younganddigital.marketing. We'll see you next time.